All right, good morning, Judson community. How are you today? You can kind of tell it is a Friday. So we're at the end of the week and the weekend is approaching us. So Friday is definitely good news. Because it's Friday, we have an amazing speaker. Today's Constitution Day. I'm going to explain that in just a little bit, give it a little bit more context. But it's Friday, the weekend's here. You've had a great week of study and practice and choir and everything else you're doing. So that makes today a great day. That sounds a little quiet for Friday. Let's try it again. That makes today a great day. God, thank you. Thank you. Not sure what you're mouthing, but I also have other good news for you. This is one of the rare chapels where you get to stay seated the whole time. Look at that. Wild applause breaks out throughout chapel overall. So just as a reminder, the World Leaders Forum Inspiration Series, incredibly important. Once again, like I said last week, you will not find a better STEM, women in leadership, aviation, science, technology, entrepreneurship program in Chicago this fall, by far. Other schools may be as good as what we're presenting, but this panel with Dr. Shania Pandya is going to be remarkable. Every student has a complimentary ticket. Go online and get your ticket. Be here Thursday night, October 12th. It'll be a great, great, great program. When I opened up chapel this year in the convocation address, I talked about three things that we emphasize at Judson University. One is pretty obvious, and that is faith. That we lead with faith. That is why we do what we do and who we are as an institution is because of our Christian identity. The other two that we talked about and that I shared, the second one is the fact that we do that in a community, and that community has responsibilities that comes with that, and that means that we are citizens of that community. And that's the emphasis of today's chapel, and that is that you are participating in a college that sits in the United States of America, and we have an amazing government that's not without its flaws and challenges, make no mistake about it, because human beings are flawed, but still, even to today, there's no other governmental system in the world that has quite accomplished what the governmental system in the United States has done. That's going to be the main point of our chapel speaker today, but the third point is equally as important, and that's when we talked about that if you live a life of faith and you do it in a community, then how can you pursue human flourishing? Because you're going to end up doing that in an economic system and structure, and that's called capitalism. And so you'll hear more about that later on the semester, but today the focus is on really the Democratic Republic and the founding documents for a couple of reasons. Number one, God is sovereign over any governmental structure that human beings could ever create. Regardless of what we create and how well we do or don't do that structure of government, God still sits in sovereignty over all of it, which means God is still in control as we work through those parts of the societies that we live in. And that is, Scripture is full of that particular story and that particular perspective. So in the United States, those governing documents are incredibly important, which is why the federal government has basically said that if you're any educational institution and you take any form of federal money, $1 of federal money, then you must do something to educate your students about the Constitution. And so they put that into law, and it's called Constitution Day. We would have done it regardless if there was a law or not, because understanding the structures that you're a part of is important as a citizen of the community. And so today we've got an amazing speaker who's going to share some thoughts related to that with you. Erika Harold is the executive director of the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Professionalism. A dedicated advocate for civility, empathy, and inclusion, Erika leads the Commission's extensive educational programming focused on advancing professionalism among the state's lawyers and judges to build trust and confidence in the justice system, which is an important part of our government. Prior to joining the commission, Erika was a commercial and civil litigation attorney at Meyer Capel in Champaign, Illinois, where she represented clients at both the trial and appellate levels and advised clients on matters of statutory and constitutional interpretation. Thus, one of the reasons she is an expert to speak with us today. Erika is a graduate of Harvard Law School, where she won a Boykin C. Wright Memorial Award for Appellate Advocacy in Harvard Law School's prestigious Ames Moot Court competition. She funded her legal education through scholarships and appearance fees she earned, and this is kind of like, oh, by the way, she was Miss America in 2003. Ms. Harold has been active in Illinois politics and most recently running a statewide race for Attorney General. Erika served on the Illinois Supreme Court Committee on Equality from 2015 to 2022 and was a commissioner with the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Professionalism from 2017 to 2022. In recognition of her bullying prevention advocacy, Erika was named on of a Fight Crime, Invest in Kids, Champions for Children, and received a leadership award from the National Center for Victims of Crime. She's a frequent speaker and panelist on topics that include professionalism, civility, leadership, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and was a featured panelist at Fortune Magazine's Most Powerful Women Next Gen conference. She received her AB in political science from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, graduating Phi Beta Kappa, and as a Chancellor Scholar. She was born and raised in Urbana-Champaign. Please welcome our speaker for Constitution Day, Erika Harold.
Can't speak without a microphone, so. Well, thank you very much, President Kroom, for that very gracious introduction. I did not think that you were going to read all of it. I would not have wanted you to do so. A couple of other things. I am a huge college sports fan. That's very important to me. Rooting for the Fighting Illini, so they're playing Penn State tomorrow. I will be at the game. Please send all the good wishes our way for that. I also want to thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be here with you for Constitution Day. Now, ironically enough, my experiences as Miss America did actually play a pivotal role in shaping my legal career, but I will share that part of my story with you a bit later, because as you were listening, you probably thought one of those things sounds like it stands out in a curious way, and I'll get into how that shaped my career and my life, and oddly enough, my views on the Constitution. Now, I'm thrilled to have this opportunity to speak with you about the Constitution, civic engagement, and your role in preserving and shaping our democracy, because these are important themes that have played a role in my life and career, and they're important themes in our country right now as we find ourselves in a position where we are seemingly increasingly divided. Now, I recognize that some people may view the Constitution as antiquated or flawed and wonder, does it have relevance in our day and in our time? But my perspective on the Constitution is captured in the words of Frederick Douglass, a freed American slave, an author, and a leading abolitionist. He said, "Interpreted as it ought to be interpreted, the Constitution is a glorious liberty document." He then said, "Read its preamble and consider its purposes." So I promise this is the only part of the Constitution that I'm going to read to you in case you get nervous about this, but it's my favorite part of the Constitution. And that short but powerful preamble states, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish the Constitution for the United States of America." Frederick Douglass recognized that there were certainly times when our nation did not live up to those principles that were elevated in the preamble that I just read to you. But the Constitution, as interpreted as it ought to be interpreted, provides a framework, a really powerful framework for petitioning the government, for changing laws, for enshrining rights and liberties, for structuring a government, for upholding the rule of law, establishing justice, and even amending the Constitution itself. And all of this is in service of each person's obligation and each generation's obligation to help form that more perfect union. And that obligation to use your life and career to help form a more perfect union shaped by constitutional principles, that's the theme that I'd like to discuss with you today. I'm going to share how some of those principles shaped my own life and career, and I'll share how the lessons that I learned from those experiences may help you as you're trying to figure out, what do I do with my life when I leave Judson University? What do I do to make an impact on the world? What do I do to live out a sense of calling? And what do I do to make the country better and to form that more perfect union? Now, I first began thinking deeply about the Constitution and the role that it plays in our lives when I was a college student at the University of Illinois. I was studying political science and history, and I began reading our nation's foundational documents. And I was reading them for myself for the first time because I didn't grow up in a family that was particularly political, and so I was reading them to see what do they actually say. I was really struck by the eloquent way that the framers attempted to place limits on the government's power and to codify the rights of people, whether through separating the powers that each branch of government was permitted to wield, or to ensuring that each branch was able to serve as a check or a balance on other branches. The Constitution seeks to prevent any one branch of government from becoming too powerful or depriving people of fundamental rights and civil liberties. I found these principles to be powerful and revolutionary, especially when compared to many other governments in many other countries, where people can be punished for criticizing their government or can be prevented from freely exercising their religious beliefs or their freedom of conscience, or where those who are accused of crimes can be deprived of a lawyer or can be deprived of the right to a trial by jury. Now, I will admit, when I was putting this speech together, I thought, should I really talk about how excited I found the Constitution to be as a college student? Because I know that that definitely places me in the category of, tell me you're a political nerd without telling me that you're a political nerd. But I figured that if you can't talk about your passion for the Constitution on a day like today at a great university like this, when can you talk about such things? But my studies in college affirmed for me a couple of key things. I knew I wanted to make an impact in the future. I knew I wanted to go to law school. I knew I wanted to help protect people's rights. And I knew that someday I wanted to run for office. And I wanted the Constitution to be the framework for the principles that I sought to advance. And I knew that I wanted to play my role in helping to form a more perfect union. And so here's the part where the Miss America pageant unexpectedly, yet pivotally, plays a role in my life. I know this is not the part of the Constitution Day speech that you were expecting to hear the Miss America pageant make an appearance, but here it goes. I knew I wanted to go to law school, and my dream was to attend Harvard Law School. But my parents did not have any money to help me pay for that. I am the oldest of four, and my parents told each of us when we were younger, they said, you are responsible for finding a way to fund your own education. Now, I am the only person in my family who does not have athletic ability. Do we have any people here who have athletic ability? If you could just raise your hand. Anyone? I won't call on you to do anything, but okay. So I would not have been able to raise my hands. I was the only member in my family, including my parents, who did not go to college on an athletic scholarship. My dad played baseball at the U of I. My mom ran track. My brother ran track at University of Memphis. I had a sister who ran track and a person who played volleyball. I will admit to you, the only thing I did as an athlete was on the 8th grade girls basketball team, I scored a basket for the wrong team. And so that quickly ended. You know what? You didn't have to laugh, but that's okay. It happened. And what made it really embarrassing was I didn't realize in the moment that it was the wrong basket, and so I started to kind of celebrate for myself because it was the first basket that I had scored all season. And I looked around to see why people were not congratulating me. I thought they could just be haters who were not willing to celebrate my athletic accomplishments. But needless to say, it became really clear to me I was not going to get an athletic scholarship to go to college. And so I thought I have to find some sort of way of paying for it. Now, I was looking to go to law school, and my parents said, you need to only apply to law schools where you can get a scholarship. But I had a wonderful advisor at the University of Illinois, and she said, if it's your dream of going to Harvard Law School, you owe it to yourself to at least apply, and if you get accepted, try to find a creative way of paying for it. And so I told my parents, I said, I have my way of paying for it. If I get accepted, I'm going to try to enter the Miss America pageant, try to win, earn scholarship money, and pay for it. And they said, that does not sound to us like a very well thought out plan. And to be fair, it wasn't. But I applied, was delighted to get accepted, but then saw that it was going to cost about $175,000 to go. My parents said, we're really proud of you that you were accepted. You should frame that letter so that you always remember it, and then find a law school that you can actually afford to attend. They were not trying to be mean, they just didn't have the money. But I then said, okay, I'm putting down my money at Harvard, and I'm going to try to enter the Miss America pageant this year. To make a long story short, it ended up working out for me. I put down my deposit, was able to enter a local pageant, the Miss Illinois pageant, found myself representing the state of Illinois at Miss America, and then was crowned Miss America. And as a result of that, I was able to earn all of the scholarship money that I needed to be able to graduate from Harvard Law School completely debt-free. So the debt-free part was pretty exciting. You should always applaud for being debt-free. But that year, I'll just tell you a few things about that year. It was an extraordinary experience because I traveled approximately 20,000 miles every month. I was promoting a platform against violence and bullying in schools. I participated in events with the USO to be able to help support the military and their families. And I made television appearances and media appearances throughout the country. Being able to represent our country and to see the best of our country was one of the greatest privileges of my life. But in addition to being able to enable me to pay for law school, there was another event that happened that year as Miss America that did have a pretty pivotal impact on my life and career. During that year as Miss America, I often talked about how my faith helped to shape my views and my life. And I talked about how faith impacted my sense of calling. There was a warden of the largest men's maximum security prison in the country who heard my interview, and he heard me talk about my faith and my interest in the criminal justice system. That warden had recently implemented some faith-based and vocational initiatives in the prison, and as a result, he'd been able to dramatically decrease the amount of violence in that prison. And he said that he had wanted someone he could invite that would be able to go to the prison and see how it had transformed. And so he saw the interview and thought, you know what? That would be a good person to invite to come to the prison. And so he invited me to come, to tour the prison, to learn about the faith-based initiatives, and then to speak at their chapel service. Now, I will be honest, I was initially very hesitant about accepting that invitation to go into a prison. But the night before I had received that invitation, I had been reading a passage from the 25th chapter of the book of Matthew, which says, "For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. Truly I tell you, whatever you did for the least of one of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." And so I felt compelled to accept that invitation to go into the prison. While I was there, I made cell visits on death row. I met with individuals who were serving life sentences, and I met with individuals who were preparing to reenter society. I heard stories of brokenness and deprivation, and then I heard stories of redemption and transformation. And from a constitutional perspective, I saw the importance of ensuring that the 14th Amendment rights of due process and equal protection under the laws are respected. And I also saw the importance of ensuring that the First Amendment right of the free exercise of religion is protected. And those weren't merely academic observations. I learned of inmates who'd been falsely convicted of crimes and had to wait numerous years before winning their freedom on appeal. And I met inmates for whom the ability to freely exercise their religious beliefs provided them with a hope and a sense of community that they said transformed their life. That experience of being in the prison, of meeting people whose lives were impacted in that way, made such an impression on me that I ended up doing an internship at Prison Fellowship Ministries after my first year of law school, and then I served on the National Board of Directors for Prison Fellowship for 15 years. Prison Fellowship, which was founded by the late Chuck Colson, did a lot to be able to advance religious freedom and constitutional rights in our country. We did ministry events at men's and women's prisons throughout the country. We advocated for criminal justice reform measures to help ensure that sentences were fair and violence was reduced in prisons. We worked with churches to provide a community of support and hope for people who were reentering society. And we worked to also provide hope for children whose parents were incarcerated. One thing I just want to say wasn't necessarily in my notes, but I do want to say there may be people here who have a parent or a relative who is incarcerated. Maybe incarceration has touched your life. I do want to tell you, do not feel a sense of shame or stigma. You are not the sum of someone else's mistake. You are not the sum of the worst thing that you have done. You still have a purpose and a calling. Do not be held in bondage by shame. As I was doing that work, I was able to put constitutional values into practice and try to do my part to help form that more perfect union. For me, it meant trying to ensure that our justice system reflected the protections enshrined in the Bill of Rights and reflected the fundamental value, worth, and dignity of every human being that the Declaration of Independence so eloquently proclaims. It says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Now, I apologize because I said I was only going to read one thing to you. That's from the Declaration of Independence, so it's not technically from the Constitution, but I do apologize because as soon as I said that, I thought, oh no, I am going to read something else to them. But it's powerful, so I hope that it at least was worth it. I also tried to apply these principles as part of my legal practice after graduating from law school. In addition to the commercial litigation cases that I handled, I took on some cases representing religious institutions in matters involving the First Amendment. And I took on a case helping to represent a man on death row who was trying to prove that his right to counsel had been unfairly denied. I took on those cases not just because of the underlying principles of Constitution that were involved, but also because of the human beings that were involved and their rights that were at stake. One of the things that I hope that you would leave with is this knowledge that the Constitution is not just a static document with words on a page, that it's rights that empower you and that give you the power to be treated fairly and equally under the law. I also handled some civil litigation cases that were not about the Constitution, but were about protecting people's rights in the legal system. A couple of cases that were particularly impactful. I represented a single mom who had lost a child and was being improperly kept from money that she was due in a settlement. And I had to try to fight to be able to ensure that she got that money. I represented an older woman who was in a nursing home when people were trying to challenge money that was given to her in an estate and that she needed to be able to provide her care. Being able to call her after our hearing and say, "We won. You don't have to leave this facility where you're getting care." It made me feel like I was making an impact and making a difference. For those of you who are considering a career in law, I can assure you that being able to fight for a client to be treated fairly, to have their rights respected and protected, it's a weighty obligation, but it's a profound privilege. And I hope it's a career that many of you consider pursuing. Are there any future lawyers in the audience? Please at least one, okay, please at least one. We saw some athletes, so if anyone's considering it, it would make me feel great to see at least one or two hands go up. Anyone considering a career in law? Okay, thank you. I don't know even if that's true, but I appreciate you making this a less awkward moment for all of us, so thank you for that. Another way in which I tried to advance constitutional principles during my career was running for political office. Now, I'm not going to make you raise your hand if you're considering running for political office, but I ran for Attorney General in Illinois a few years ago. My platform was focused on constitutional principles, such as upholding the rule of law, applying the law, and advocating for the people of Illinois without regard for political party or partisan affiliation, promoting the independence of the office, and promoting transparency and accountability in office. Running for office was incredibly grueling. It was the most exhausting yet rewarding thing I've ever done. It was more than a year of traveling throughout the state, of participating in candidate forums and debates, meeting community groups, issuing position papers, walking in parades and fundraising, doing media interviews, and asking perfect strangers for their vote. There were many nights when I only got a couple of nights of sleep, hours of sleep. I wish it was nights of sleep, hours of sleep. And I was operating on nothing more than caffeine, sugar, and adrenaline. But it was one of the most rewarding things that I've ever done. And one of the reasons that it was because I always recognized that in many countries, a young Black woman like myself, who did not come from wealth or political clout, would never have the opportunity to run for political office. But in our country, where our rights are codified in the Constitution, race, gender, religion, wealth, and class are not barriers that can prevent someone from running for office. One of the favorite things that I did during that campaign was to shoot a television commercial with my grandmother. She was 97 years old at the time, and she was one of my favorite people in the world. She was a Black woman who was born just 1 year after the Constitution was amended to give women the right to vote. But she was born more than 40 years before the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was enacted, which prohibited racial discrimination in voting. For her, running for political office would have been unthinkable. But when I asked her, would she appear in a commercial with me for my campaign, she was filled with enormous pride. Because for her, she was able to see in her lifetime that she had a granddaughter who was running for Attorney General of Illinois, an office charged with ensuring that the Constitution is upheld and that everyone's treated equally under the law. I ultimately fell short in that election. In case you didn't know, I did not win. Or I said I fell short, and my nephew, who was 5 at the time, he goes, "So you lost?" I said, "Well, I fell short. I didn't prevail." He goes, "You lost." So yes, I lost. But there was no person who was more proud of my campaign than my grandmother, not just because of what it represented for me, but what it said about opportunity within our country. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. famously said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I currently serve as the executive director of the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Professionalism. This is a commission that the Supreme Court created to promote ethics, integrity, civility, and inclusion among Illinois lawyers and judges. We provide education on those topics. We promote those principles through our blog, video, and social media channels. So feel free to follow me on social media if you would like, but tomorrow it'll be all sports. We also host an annual professionalism conference that's attended by hundreds of lawyers and judges from around Illinois and the country. Our goal is to ensure that Illinois' legal and judicial systems provide efficient and effective service for you, for all the people of Illinois, and that we do it with the highest levels of professionalism and integrity. I love this job because it combines my passion for the law and the justice system with principles of ethics and integrity. And it also emphasizes a value that I think is needed now more than ever in our country, and that's civility. Civility means simply advocating vigorously for your client, your opinion, your position, but doing so in a way that shows respect for those who may disagree with you, and treating opposing sides and any opponents with dignity. In the legal system, there are serious consequences when incivility occurs. It makes it more difficult to represent your clients. It makes it more difficult to be able to get things done. It undermines people's confidence in the rule of law or that the system is actually just and working to serve them. But in a time when people are divided politically, or unfollow or block people on social media who disagree with them, or lose friendships in real life over disagreements that devolve into disregard and disrespect, I believe that civility is the value that allows us to remain engaged with people with whom we may disagree. It's the value that allows us to stand with conviction, yet listen with compassion. It's the value that allows free speech to flourish. It's what enables people who are fractured to remain in a union, no matter how imperfect. And ironically, civility is the value that can actually enable you to be heard in an arena of noise and dissension. And this is true even in political campaigns, and particularly in them when they're heated. When I ran for office, I knew that regardless of how hard fought the race was, on election night, I was committed to behaving with civility and grace. I recognized that if I didn't do it, it would undermine everything that I had just talked about during the campaign. So as the polls closed on election night and the returns started to come in, you hope that it's going to be you, but I realized pretty quickly that the election was not going to go my way. Or as my nephew said, that I was going to lose. And I knew that I was going to have to go before the press and the supporters who had gathered for a victory party, and instead of celebrating, concede defeat. Now, as I walked to the podium, I was filled with so many emotions. Working hard for something for 15 months, putting everything out there, and then realizing that millions of people went into the ballot and voted against you. It feels embarrassing, it feels humiliating, it also just feels really discouraging because you feel like you let people down. But I knew that none of that mattered. I had to go out there and represent the values that I had promoted. And so as I began my concession speech, I congratulated my opponent, and I expressed my sincere hope that he would make an incredible impact in his new office. And then I felt compelled to ask everyone in attendance at my party to applaud for my opponent. Even though I could feel my heart kind of breaking a little bit, I knew that that was what I was called to do in that moment. And then I shared during that speech that I had drawn inspiration from the passage of Scripture that calls us to run with patience the race that is set before us, and that I wanted to finish that race and to finish it well. And I knew that even though we had come short, for me, finishing it well meant living out those values of civility and respect and integrity. And that speech was carried on TV and radio throughout the state. A couple months after the election, a woman recognized me from the campaign and told me that she and her family had voted for me. I said, oh, that's great. Too bad no one else did either. But she then said she had been moved by watching my concession speech on TV that night. She said, you may be wondering what the purpose was for your campaign. She said, it's possible that entire campaign was so that you could have that moment on television that night to share what you share and to impact people in ways that really matter. And at first I was kind of disappointed because I thought, so what you're saying is the biggest impact I made was in conceding defeat on election night? But then I realized the whole point of being involved in any of these big principles is to actually make a difference, is to actually change people's hearts and minds. And you can do that even if you haven't won. And so on this Constitutional Day, I would charge each of you with the following. I would ask you to read the Bill of Rights and to reflect upon the power of those words, which stand as a protection for your individual rights and your civil liberties. There will not be a quiz. I will not ask anyone. It's an honor system. But I would encourage you to do it at least some point today or this weekend. These words may have been written before your birth, but they powerfully remain your birthright. I would also encourage you to read the preamble to the Constitution and reflect upon the concepts of establishing justice and forming a more perfect union. And then have your heart and mind open to injustices in the world. Now, the injustices that you see may be different than ones I've talked about today, and that's okay. And the rights that are important to you and that you want to pursue, they may be different from some of the ones I've talked about, and that's okay as well. What matters is that you find your own voice and your own place in our constitutional story, because it's your story as well, and that you use your time to make an impact, to make it count. And I know that in this room, there's considerable talent, ambition, potential, and intellect. You wouldn't be here if you weren't committed to living out your calling to make a difference in the world. I would encourage you to embrace that and to live boldly and powerfully. And to do so, though, with civility, courageously advocating for your beliefs, but doing so in a way that respects the fundamental dignity and worth of those with whom you may disagree. During my law school commencement, U.S. Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan, who was then dean of the law school, shared words of wisdom. She said, "You will face choices between expedience and principle. You will face choices between doing what is easy and doing what is right. You will face choices between disregarding or upholding the values embedded in the idea of the rule of law." She challenged us to be the lawyer who stands up for principle and upholds the true and the right. And that's my final challenge to you today. Be the person who stands up for principle, and be the person who upholds that which is true and that which is right. Stand on principle even when it's unpopular, and recognize that that is how you will make your impact. Our state, our country, and our constitutional democracy is counting on you, and I'm counting on you as well. Thank you very much.